Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, March 16th, 2026, and today we're doing a full-blown tomato show. Now, the old voice is getting incrementally better every day, but it's still somehow not back. So here's my plan. My hope and aim is a brand new original show by Wednesday. We shall see if that's possible voice-wise. It may get a little hybrid-y for a little while, do like a partial old show, partial new show, and then we'll be back to, normal shows before too long, theoretically. Also, before I introduce today's show, our annual bracket challenge is up. It's live. I think this is like 8 years running. And of course, like usual, I'll send the top two a hat or a copy of my book or something like we usually do. Link will be in the show notes. Otherwise, today's episode is all about tomatoes, from starting tomatoes, grafting tomatoes, and finally, can you let your tomatoes grow wild? We'll see. So let's do it.
Let's do the tomato starting thing, since that is on my list to do for ourselves this week. It is really not all that different from the pepper production that I detailed, last week? But because I do grafted tomatoes, that does throw a bit of a wrench into the whole process. So let's talk about how we start and grow out our tomatoes in a lo-fi way in the first segment. Then in the third segment, we'll talk about planting strategies. Trellising, we will leave for another show, because trellising is its own segment, for sure. Now, I've already discussed grafting versus not grafting, and all of the tomatoes we are growing in the tunnel this year will be grafted. Our field tomatoes, probably not. I love grafting, but by the time we start our field tomatoes, I'm a little bit too busy for all that. But for those earliest tomatoes that I will be starting this week, here's how I go about it. First, we grow almost exclusively cherry tomatoes in our tunnels. We don't grow a lot of heirlooms or reds or anything like that. We don't have a big market for it, but we do have a big market for cherry tomatoes. I grow a mix that includes, but is not limited to, Sun Gold, Black Cherry, a couple different reds, though I've yet to find one I really am super in love with, Blush, and one or two of the Bumblebee types, or those like stripy fun ones. I like having some different sizes and shapes and colors in there, and our restaurants and retailers generally like that too. At the market, we would occasionally get a complaint that customers just wanted the orange ones or just wanted the red ones, but we let the other growers do this sort of monochromatic thing. For us, I like the mix, and I like that if, for instance, one variety goes down for some reason or slows down, the diversity is added protection against having a slow crop or total crop loss. I also use two different varieties for grafting, Estimino and Fortimino, which I get from high mowing. I don't have a preferred combo of which grafting rootstock variety better fits which tomato variety yet. I just know my grafted plants dramatically outperform my ungrafted plants regardless of which of those rootstocks I use. Anyway, I already did a show talking about why I graft, and so you can go back and listen to that. And just so we're all on the same page, in order to do this, you basically take the rootstock is a plant that is vigorous and it is usually disease resistant, and that is what you're grafting the type of tomato that you want on top of for that disease resistance and that vigor. So that's the whole point of grafting. So I start the rootstock seeds and the cherry tomato seeds at the same time. However, if I was grafting large heirloom tomatoes or reds or whatever, I would start those at least a few days, if not a full week, before the grafted plants, because the rootstocks are going to grow fast, similar to the cherry tomatoes. The heirloom plants are going to grow slow, similar to molasses. Anyway, rootstock seeds are still just tomatoes. So in terms of starting, it's all kind of the same thing. We start those in 2-inch soil blocks or 72 cell wind strips, placing one seed per block with at least a couple extra blocks, getting 2 seeds in case a few don't germinate. In that case, we will take the extra plant, pluck it out, and plant it into the block that is missing a plant. So basically what you'd see is like some of the blocks would have 2 plants in them, some of them had 0 plants, and then you just take one of those ones with 2, you just pop that plant out and put it in one of the empty blocks. Simple enough. That to me is just easier and more time efficient than using the mini blockers for our soil blocks and then potting those up to 2-inch blocks. Anyway, I just find that faster. Next, we will cover those blocks with the seed in them lightly with a little bit of soil mix and get them to that warm temperature that tomatoes like, roughly in the 85 degrees Fahrenheit range or around 30 degrees Celsius. So like tank top weather. I don't wear tank tops. I will never subject you to that, but That's what I would imagine tank top weather is. Now, they will still germinate as low as 59 degrees Fahrenheit, which would be like 15 degrees Celsius. And I'm always amazed at the volunteer tomato seedlings from last year's crop that germinate in our high tunnel in February and March when I'm trying to grow other things. But the colder it is, the longer this germination process will take. At the warmer temps, you are looking at roughly 4 days to germinate. Cooler temps, and you are looking at a week or 2 weeks or more. A heat pad works well for getting the right temps, or you can use a space heater. A greenhouse can work well if it's sunny, but the late winter is not exactly known for its sunshine, at least not here in Kentucky. We usually germinate them in the closet with our hot water heater and furnace, which is in the mid 70s most of the time, and that works fine for us. Just got to watch for germination so they don't get too leggy. Like if they germinate and just grow in the dark, they will get really tall and big white stems. You could also build a germ chamber, and those can be constructed by converting an old fridge or with a heater, a thermostat, and something for humidity, but we'll discuss DIY germ chambers another time. My hot water heater and furnace in the closet, that's kind of my germ chamber. A heat pad works pretty well too. Basically, like having learned to farm on an off-grid, lo-fi farm, that's often where my brain goes to those sorts of solutions, but certainly these things can be done more efficiently and cleanly. Now, in an ideal scenario, you have enough heat and maybe even some supplementary light to keep them growing without ever having to move them. That would be ideal. That is not always the case, though, so you may have to move them into the house at night when the forecast is dropping below a certain temperature, which on really cold nights, even with a space heater out there, we move them inside anyway, just as insurance. You can get a digital thermometer that will send you alerts straight to your phone if the temps get, drop too much, which is cool, but for me, what's also cool is not having to worry about it in the middle of the night. So I'm a bit of a worrier, not to be confused with warrior, which I am definitely not. And I like my sleep. Also, a worthwhile point on this is if you do move them inside, don't put them somewhere so warm that they want to grow a lot without sunlight. That will make them leggy as well. As for the grafts, if they are starting to outrun the regular tomato starts, we will move them to a colder part of the tunnel to slow them down, say near a door or near the plastic. The idea is to keep both the graft and the tomato plant itself the same size, the same diameter as much as possible, because when you attach them, you don't want to be attaching different sized stems. It won't work as well. If you are not grafting, then you just want to grow nice, thick stemmed tomato starts. If you are grafting, I would just watch the video I did on grafting, which I will link in the show notes, with any other relevant tomato videos I've done. I will also talk about grafting on the week that we actually do the grafting. Now, I just want to make sure it's clear. I am planting the tomatoes I'm talking about here inside of a tunnel, which I usually shoot for the first week of April or so. We could not plant that early outside here in Kentucky in Zone 6B. Outside, tomatoes don't go in before the second week in Kentucky generally. You can maybe pull off the first week if the weather's nice, but I usually wait till the second. Derby Day is kind of the tradition. So if I'm only planting outside, I'm waiting another 3 or 4 weeks before starting my tomatoes. For outdoor tomatoes, give yourself 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost, depending on how much space you have to grow them out. Or just buy transplants from a trusted farmer. Buying transplants, in fact, could make a really good show topic, because when you get bad transplants, that can stop you before you even start.
Today's episode is brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By, the farmer-owned cooperative. Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything. Custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. With their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you to put your best food forward. Schedule a demo today at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show.
All right, so we're back at the tomatoes now. They are a few inches tall, starting to take over their respective trays, or so we're pretending. We have kept them watered and happy up until this point, but they need more space. This is where we would pot them up, sometimes called potting on, meaning move them into bigger blocks or containers, giving the roots and the plants more room to spread out and grow. Usually, if using cells, you go into 3 or 4 inch pots. If using blocks, you go into the bigger 4-inch blocks or into soil balls, where you basically just create a ball of soil mix around the start. It's pretty easy to, and kind of fun to do, and especially on a small scale, it makes more sense than spending $103 on a 4-inch soil blocker. I own that blocker. It's a good tool. I do not use it enough, and it does not save me enough time to justify $100 on our farm. Your farm may be different. If you're doing thousands of transplanted tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, the 4-inch block makes sense. Anyway, I pot them up, and if using grafted plants, you cannot have soil above the graft. That goes for both planting and potting up. Can't go above the graft. Otherwise, you have just planted an ungrafted tomato plant because the top part, the scion, will root out and grow without using the rootstock, which defeats the purpose by bypassing the rootstock's benefits. Anyway, after potting up, we grow them until it is time to plant. Now, if you are not using grafted tomato plants, you can bury them a little bit in the pot. So like as you're potting up, don't be afraid to put some of the soil mix above the base of the plant. Anyway, after potting up, we grow them until it's time to plant. If they start to look hungry at all, we will fertilize them with a little bit of fish hydrolysate, following their recommendations for dilution, whatever company we got it from. And before they go into the ground, the plants, we will soak the base of the plant in Jadal microorganism solution. I'll link a video to that in the show notes from Chris Trump. It's just, for me, it's one of the better ones for root application. I don't spray it, but I do apply it to the roots, just because we've had good success from it, or at least seemingly good success from it. For planting in the field, you typically just do a single row, lightly pruned if at all. In the tunnel, it's a different story because we generally do one row down the middle on what is called a double leader system, meaning 2 different branches of the same tomato plant are trained up their own string. If you're grafting, it's a helpful way to get the cost of labor and expenses down to get 2 plants for the price of 1. Then we plant those tomatoes at 18 inches apart, but you could go as close as 8 inches. That just means an absolute ton of pruning for airflow as well as fans and a really refined fertilization situation. I'm not that hardcore. 18 inches is plenty close for me. This year, I may actually cut it back to like 2 feet or more between plants, around 61 centimeters. But that's because we're taking it vaguely easy this season. Easy, I guess, compared to past season, not to probably normal gardeners. Again, grafted tomatoes cannot go into the ground below the graft. Same thing. Ungrafted tomatoes can be buried up to the top leaves. Just make sure to trim all the lower leaves off first. The challenge with grafted plants not going deep is that they can break from mishandling or the heavy winds. This is another reason we don't really use grafted tomatoes in the field because we don't want them breaking. I usually like to add a nice compost to the base of the hole where I plant the tomato plant to just give it a little bit of a nice good start and fill it in with water just to kind of water it in. If it's at all too dry, to ensure the tomatoes take off like a rocket. A rocket that doesn't leave the ground. Kind of a weird rocket. Now, I wouldn't use like a highly fertilizing compost like chicken manure or something, because then you're just going to get like a really robust plant with no tomatoes. Just like a nice light amount of good well-rounded compost. And I mostly do that because we're also doing such intensive planting. Like when you're doing 2 plants out of 1 plant, you generally have to have more fertility. So yeah. It's possible I have not talked about grafting yet with you all, which is wild, but over the last 2 seasons, I trialed some grafted cherry tomatoes versus ungrafted cherry tomatoes, and the difference in production and vigor was just undeniable. It was profound. Now, these are not scientific, rigorous trials. I'm a busy farmer who makes videos and stuff. But they were, just basic field comparisons. And depending on the week, my grafted cherry tomatoes were out yielding by 10 or 20% or more. And then lasting significantly longer than the ungrafted cherry tomatoes. Last year, early blight struck those tomatoes and ultimately wiped out our ungrafted tomatoes in late July, but did not bother our grafted tomatoes, which I ultimately had to kill in November because they just kept going. And that's significant because leaf blights, like early blight, for instance, are not something that grafted tomatoes are purported to help with. Like, that's not the point of them. Grafting is about increasing vigor and decreasing soil-borne pathogens, not foliar ones. Not really what they do. Anyway, I should back up for a second and talk about what grafting is, because although I've had success with it, it's not for everyone. Basically, you're taking a desired fruiting part of the plant, this what we call the scion, and connecting it, grafting it, onto another variety that has characteristics you desire, such as disease resistance, or maybe vigor, or maybe, in the case of fruit trees, it's something like height, i.e. dwarf rootstock for apple trees to keep them low for picking. This base serves as the bottom part of the grafted plant, hence rootstock. The big question is, with the added cost of the rootstock seeds and the added cost of the labor to both literally double the number of tomatoes you start and then graft them, is it worth it to graft tomatoes? Well, naturally, there is at least some research on the economics that show that the labor and cost are generally made up for by the gains, so long as you have a good, robust market for the fruit. And for our farm, the grafting has been absolutely unequivocally worth it. However, there is a small catch to our farm. We solely do cherry tomatoes for grafting. So that's something to consider with my experiences. I've never grafted heirlooms or compared them, or slicers, for instance, though I do plan to graft a few this year just for goofs and, I don't know, see how it goes. It's just been for us. We don't have a big enough market for those sorts of things here for the bigger tomatoes. Cherry tomatoes, however, nobody else bothers with because they're not ridiculous like I am. Now, I know that the way I just described it, it sounds like you just take the top off of one and set it on top of the other, but obviously there's a lot more to grafting that I can get into another time, or you can watch the video we did a while back on grafting that I will link in the show notes. All the information in there is still relevant. There are also numerous grafting videos from universities and nurseries online that can be helpful as well. I will be grafting again this March, so I'll probably just talk about the process more then. And I'd also like to try my hand at grafting cucumbers as well and see if I can improve my cucumber production, which is probably my worst crop. I'm just not a good cucumber grower. But obviously, you have to start planting now because, well, you have to start the plants about 2 weeks earlier than you normally would start them if you plan to graft them and would like to have the fruit at roughly the same time because the healing process slows the plants down quite a bit. You may also have to start the scion plants at an earlier time than the rootstock plants because the difference in growth speeds, though I have found one, cherry tomatoes grow pretty fast and keep up with the vigorous rootstock plants, but also two, in the case that there is an imbalance in growth, I can kind of steer the growth a bit by moving my rootstock plants to a colder part of the tunnel if they are growing faster than my scion stock. Ideally, you want the plants to be at the same diameter at the stem at the time of grafting. So for regular old slow growing heirlooms, you would likely want to start the desired scion plants. Again, scion means the plants that supply the fruiting half of the plant earlier than the rootstock plants to allow them to mature more evenly. Anyway, if you do try it, just start small, or if you have tried it, share your input, share your experiences. Also, don't bank your entire production on grafting in the first year. If you follow all the instructions that universities and such have put out there and watch the video I mentioned, you should have success. But for real, follow all the instructions. If you're not an instructions following type of person, grafting is probably going to be a superb waste of money and time for you. What I would do if I wanted to try this for the first time is to start your usual tomato crop and then start a grafting crop as well. If the grafts work out, use those and sell the other plants. If they don't work out, then just use the ungrafted plants for your tomato production that year. In fact, I've thought about, but will probably never do because I need a bigger heated greenhouse, selling grafted plants as a business because I'm decent at it and I find it fun, which kind of surprised me. Honestly, when grafted plants first burst on the market garden scene, I was kind of skeptical, which meant that I was frankly annoyed at how comparatively better they have done for us on our farm. But I'm a convert now, at least for my cherry tomato production in the tunnel.
Today's episode is brought to you by Good Agriculture. If you'd rather be on the farm than inside doing your taxes, you are not alone. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping and tax filing, so there is no scrambling at tax time. They keep your books clean and up to date and show you where your farm's finances stand. If you're behind, they'll get you caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. All right, back to the show.
This idea came from a Patreon member, so shout out to Carol Langer, who said they love the episodes we've done about failed experiments, said those are very helpful and insightful, and that maybe I can talk more in detail about challenges and failures. No problem, Carol. Plenty of fodder there. So today, for your Messy Monday, I want to talk about how I completely stopped pruning our high tunnel tomatoes in July of this summer, and then what happened. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see what this looks like, and I'll also share a photo to the No-Till Growers Instagram feed. But basically, If you were to walk into my tunnel right now, you would pretty much run straight into a tomato plant. From the outside, you can see tomato plants pushing against the tunnel plastic. It's a bit of a jungle. What happened is that I ran out of time and energy in the middle of the summer to keep up with, well, most things. Hannah and I decided to try and go it alone this season without an employee because, that was a good idea, which to be fair, it made sense in the moment, and I will no doubt talk about that at some point soon. And anyway, it turns out that I'm not 27 anymore, which first, weird, but it was a brutal summer. So in terms of triage, I was just like, I can't keep up with pruning these tomatoes anymore. Let's just let them go and see what happens. And here's what I learned through that experience. Although harvest is a much bigger pain and disease is certainly a concern, and the plants are not exactly minding the space that I originally designated for them, they have continued to produce the entire latter half of the season. The yield is down slightly from the summer, but that's pretty typical because so too is the sunlight down, and I don't have good enough data to compare these harvests to last year's harvest, which my poor data is a messy Monday topic on its own for the future. So although I wouldn't recommend not pruning as a strategy, I will say that if you need to focus on getting your fall garden established and need to eliminate something from your to-do list in order to make that happen, going with a little jungle pruning in your tunnel may be a possibility. I basically just cut the plants back and keep them out of my way, sort of think bushwhacking through a dense jungle, and then I harvest. If you do not have a strong, well-supported tunnel, these plants are also significantly heavier this way, so the weight could become an issue. And I've only done this for cherries, so who knows what would happen with slicers. I don't think I will do this again on purpose, but I know that if I'm all alone or just really behind, it's at least an option. So this is not a recommendation, more of a last resort, survival sort of tactic. It's similar to what happens in the fields, I guess, because I don't prune those tomatoes that I just put out in the fields, but the field tomatoes don't grow nearly as long or as tall, so it rarely is an issue. Anyway, I think that's it for Growers Daily today.
All right, thank you all for hanging in there while I work on the old voice. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors, and if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of March, you will get a shout out, but we're going to hold off on that until I can do a full episode, at which point we'll have to do a boatload of them. So that should be a super fun, and I'll tell a better story, all that good stuff. So stay tuned for that. And thank you all again for all the patience. Much love. See you tomorrow. Bye.